It was more of an intervention in those conversations around skills that you might have already in your organisation. What skills do people have? What makes them want to develop their skills? We wanted to make this really relevant and realistic. So we didn't necessarily want to say, what is your grand strategy for digital skills? We wanted to know the realistic picture on the ground. Next slide, please, Ollie. So out of all the things we did, I'm going to focus on just two. I'm going to talk to you, as I said, about the questions themselves, and then I'm going to talk to you a bit about the recommendations and the data analysis, and hope that both of those separately will be useful to you. Ollie, if you could move on. The Padlet I've introduced to you, hopefully you can copy down the link from there if you don't have it available in your email. And that question was just like, what do you already know about digital skills in your organisation? Of course, you might have an organisation that's really small. It might just be you. We found this was the case with more organisations than we expected. So that's quite an easy question to ask yourself. But many people really don't know where to start. And we've hopefully provided some questions that make it straightforward and unthreatening to start asking those questions in a straightforward, realistic, and hopefully informal way with people who work with and alongside you. Next one, please, Ollie. Okay, so I'm going to just take you through 3 quick slides around the 3 areas that we asked people to talk to us in. If you could move on, Ollie. And the team that I work with, we've done similar projects in a whole range of sectors, health sector and education particularly. So we did have some background knowledge about how best to ask and how not to ask people about their digital skills. We know that it's very rare for one person in an organisation, even if they're identified as a digital lead, to know about everyone's skills in the organisation. And we also know that there are strategies, but people on the ground can see them very differently. And when you see the data about awareness of digital strategies, you will realise what I mean by that. And we also know that it's of limited value to ask people to rate their own digital skills, that we have to be more subtle in what we ask. So we have a range of questions up our sleeves that we adapted for Heritage that ask people about their attitudes, about why they develop digital skills, you know, what makes them want to, what are the issues in front of them that make them feel, oh, I really need to update my data analytics, or I really need to get some social media skills. And most crucially, what they need from their organisation to make that step from needing the skills to actually developing them. Right, if we can go on to look at the 3 areas of questions. The first one is very personal, and it starts with people's attitude and predisposition to acquire digital skills. And we find that this creates a really non-threatening way in to a series of questions, because the main issue you're going to have with any survey of this kind is just getting people to complete it, as with any survey. So it's a nice non-threatening introduction that starts from attitudes and predispositions and really beliefs about my digital skills, why they're of value to me, and why I might go about developing them. If we could move on. So to digital practices, this is the area that we had to really customise to Heritage, because of course digital practice in Heritage is really different to other sectors. And we were able to do some background work, particularly drawing on the Digital Compass tool that some of you will know, to think about what those might be. And this was never meant to be a full audit of skills in your organisation, but rather a benchmark with some key skills that you could then compare from your organisation to the kind of national benchmark and average. And finally, next slide. The most important thing for us really is always to ask, what is it the organisation is doing that makes it possible or rewarding or supportive for people to develop their skills further? And that, of course, in a sense, is the only thing we really care about. We don't just want to know what skills are out there. We want to help people develop. So it's a very developmentally focused survey. That's what I'm going to tell you about the questions. If we could move on, Ollie. But of course, if you want to read our report, then you can have access to those questions. I don't know if the Heritage Fund plans to run Dash again, but even if they don't, the questions are there. They're really easy to pick up and run yourself if you want to just take a few of them and use them to run in your organisation. And because we've kind of trialled it and verified it, we know they're useful questions to ask. So I've got some findings to share with you. I've tried to keep to the strategic ones because I know this is a workshop about strategy. I'm going to move through some of them with just 1 or 2 observations, but please, as I say, don't get frustrated. Do go and read the report and look at them in more detail. So Ollie, if we could move on to the first set of findings. Obviously you want to know, because we're all researchers and evidence-based, who did we ask? Well, our total number of respondents was over 4,000, which we were kind of modestly pleased with, given the context we were asking in. We had hoped to have higher numbers than that. Some of you may remember that in March, April and May, you were quite concerned about other things. So we were modestly happy that this number of people had chosen to speak to us, and from so many organisations. Now, I've put a map up there of some of the north of the border organisations. You will say to yourselves, that is more than 16. Yes, it is. The map shows everyone who engaged with us to any extent, but we only included the responses and the organisations where we had enough data to really make a valid case for each organisation. So there were more people who engaged with us than we included in our final set of data. Nice map there. So those of you who like GIS data, thanks Ollie, can see that we were trying to use that behind the scenes. Now, I know that the Heritage Fund uses other issues to find out about organisation size. We just went with numbers of people because it was the people we were interested in. And, you know, our average organisation across the UK had magic number, 5 staff, 25 volunteers. There probably isn't one organisation that actually has that number. Obviously, that is the mode across the UK. And I think north of the border, having a quick look, the average size is smaller than that. But what I was really pleased with was that, unlike projects that have done this kind of exercise before, we were able to attract a really large number of small organisations, because that was, in a sense, they were the people we felt we hadn't heard from and we wanted to hear from. So our findings really are quite weighted towards those 50% of organisations that had small numbers of staff, including, you know, quite a large number. 20% of our responses were from organisations where only volunteers were involved. So we were really pleased to get that kind of very diverse picture of what heritage means and what a heritage organisation is. You know, everything from a big national project or federation of projects to kind of very small scale local history meets and transport related projects. Fascinating to really see the kind of scale of local engagement and community engagement. But the important thing to say is that for smaller organisations, the access to technology training support is a really big problem. And so our recommendations really look at things like how organisations can work together to access some of those things collectively, where accessing it as a separate organisation may be less available. So we also looked, next slide please, at the type of organisations that we had. Again, unlike the fund, we asked people to tick all that apply. So we weren't trying to put people in categories as such. So down the right-hand side, you can see the 6 categories the fund uses. And what we found was that most people don't think they fit neatly into one of those boxes. Community heritage particularly was likely to be an organisation that fits into at least 2 boxes. There was usually community plus at least one other, whereas museums were likely to just tick that one box. So we were able to get a really nice sense of the diversity of organisations and particularly the diversity of community heritage going on. And finally, next slide, we looked at the kind of roles that were of the people who were speaking to us. And we found really significant differences in terms of digital between volunteers, the trustees and the employed staff we looked at. And so we've analysed the data separately for each of those groups, and I'll talk you through that as we go through. Age was interesting. I did all the qualitative analysis, and age appeared in a lot of free text answers as a problem, particularly older people saying, well, of course, the problem we have is that we're all too old. And if only we had some young people, that would sort everything out. And I'm happy to say that it's a much more complicated picture than that. There are incredibly rich digital skills among the older age group. But we do have some suggestions about this real gap in the under 25s as members of heritage organisations, and that perhaps there are some solutions there. So moving on to the findings we had about attitudes, really unsurprising this. If you've asked this kind of question in other sectors, everybody thinks that they're more confident than average. Probably true of driving, probably true of cooking, certainly true of digital skills. Everybody tends to think they are above average in acquiring digital skills. But it's interesting that staff definitely expected to find digital skills easier than our other 2 categories of volunteers and trustees. No good surprises there. And in a sense, that's just a tuning up question, because then we go on to ask, next slide please, about the specific things that motivate people to develop their digital skills. And here it's interesting to see that solving immediate tasks right in front of you will be the things that make most people look around for some support, that make people aware that even though you might think you're a 7 out of 10, when it comes to acquiring skills, actually you might need some specific help with a challenge that's right in front of you. Also really interesting, actually, anecdotally, that when we came to look at how that had changed going into lockdown, as people were suddenly confronted with lots of new technology, people were acquiring digital skills day by day, but their confidence actually decreased, because your confidence is always relative to what's right in front of you, rather than some abstract set of things you think you can do all the time. So the motivations for our 3 categories were slightly different, and I'm kind of interested to note that the motivation was always lower for volunteers. So in general, volunteers find less reasons to think they need to go and develop their digital skills. But overall, you know, a really good, rich picture of the reasons people go and do that. And I think something to be positive around as a sector, that people find lots of reasons to want to go out and build their capability. So Ollie, yes, next slide, please. Thank you for your kind of intuition of where I'm heading with this. Now, there's lots of detail on this slide. I'm really not going to go through it. These were the kind of key skills we picked out. The top 2 for every category, volunteers, trustees and staff, were doing research on the internet and writing digital copy. Probably not very surprising. But what did surprise me, having done these kind of surveys for several years in different sectors, was really the richness and depth and high quality of digital skills there were in the sector, in some quite specialised areas, developing strategies, developing surveys, dealing with content, dealing with design and infographics. Really, compared with other sectors, quite a high level of specialism. And what we could see was that there was real strength in general skills, but also a lot of specialists, particularly among employed staff. And those specialisms were very, very sector and actually organisation specific. So lots going on in this space. And again, as you won't be surprised to learn, mainly staff who have the high levels of skills, but lots of volunteers, lots of retired people going into voluntary roles who actually are retiring from jobs where they've had to do digital and who have those skills. Whether they want to use them in their volunteering role is an issue, but they certainly a lot of older people do have them. So moving on. What skills people wanted to develop. A really nice match here, if you can remember the slide I put up about the skills that that organisations said they wanted going into lockdown. Really nice match there with the skills people said they wanted to develop. There's a high motivation to develop skills that are useful to my organisation in my role, particularly around social media and content, but also around collaboration and using data. So you know, I think we looked at the motivation, the reasons why people were motivated. I don't think we asked enough about kind of people's intrinsic motivation to improve their organisation. But from the free text data, lots of people just wanted to do what was useful. They said, I just want to do what makes me useful in my role. And these were the kind of things they were really happy to take on. And working with data. So actually, I'll just stop on the word cloud, because I developed that. I generated that just this morning, specifically from the data from Scotland. And I'm interested to see in the left-hand corner that GIS data was coming up. So clearly there's a lot of projects in Scotland that are dealing with mapping data and maybe doing really interesting things with it. You've probably had workshops on that yourself. So that was just a really nice little local piece to find out. Okay, so now we're kind of moving on now to that third thing that I said was most important, which is never mind your skills. What is your organisation doing to help you? And you'll remember that people's confidence in their own skills was at that kind of 6 or 7 level, but their feeling about how their organisation was supporting them was, generally speaking, a lot lower than that, particularly among volunteers. Now, I have to say, a lot of volunteers would say, well, I don't really think it is my organisation's role to support my digital skills. But even with trustees and staff, there was a gap there between the skills people felt they had and the support they were getting to develop them further. Next slide, please, Ollie. So we kind of delved a bit more deeply into that that kind of sense of perhaps a lack. And you can see right at the bottom, I've boxed out that finding that really quite high numbers of volunteers and even of staff and trustees had never discussed their digital skills in any of these settings we offered to them, including the most informal ones where they might just be chatting with colleagues and, you know, about maybe even looking at a colleagues' shoulders, which is how we find a lot of digital skills do get transferred in small organisations. A lot of that didn't seem to be going on even before lockdown. But the cheering thing is that, you know, at least a third of staff feel that they've had a wide range of opportunities to discuss their digital skills. And the other cheering thing is this is a really easy thing to embed into organisational practice. So when it comes to our recommendations, that really is the first one. Just talk about this stuff and find these situations and other ones in which you can talk to your staff, formally or informally, about the skills they have, the ones they want to develop, the ones that matter to them, the ones that matter to you. And of course, involving every role in that, not just employed staff who have maybe a digital specialism attached to what they do. So if we look at the next kind of feature of that organisational support, we asked what sorts of things people might be aware of thanks to their organisation. And great to see really high levels of awareness of things like data security, respectful online behaviour, digital health and well-being, really lovely high levels for staff about digital health and well-being, which is frankly unusual, even in the healthcare setting. But look at the low levels for digital strategy. So since this workshop is about digital strategy, I thought it was well worth pointing out that, you know, really low levels of people are aware that their organisation even has a digital strategy. So whatever digital strategy you have or write, you know, the first hurdle is ensuring that people know it's there. But the other thing I guess I would say about this is you don't have to trumpet your digital strategy as a strategy. If all your staff, employees, trustees and volunteers know some of the other stuff on this slide, maybe they don't need to know that it comes from a digital strategy. They just need to know about these things that are important in their role. Okay, next slide. I'm nearly through with the presentation and we can have some discussion. Again, we had a whole kind of raft of things that organisations might well provide. And if you have a digital strategy, these might well be some of the things you've put into it. How do we help our volunteers and staff to set themselves up to work from home, make sure they've got the devices they need? What sort of training do we put in place? But again, you know, down at the bottom, quite high levels saying that none of these things are in place for me. It may be that the strategy says they're there. It may even be that, you know, at some level they are there. But if people don't know they're there, then it's less useful to them. And some of the things on this slide are really about how supported people feel to develop their skills. Whether they sense that if they, you know, take a few hours out at the weekend to practice something, or to go on a course, or to download a little online video to do something, will that even get recognised and valued when they go back into their role the following week? And the levels for recognition are also quite low. So the things on this slide, if you go and read our report, are things that we know from our work in other sectors make an organisation developmental as far as digital skills go. And these are the kind of things you would be putting in a skills strategy to help your staff and volunteers feel rewarded and supported and acknowledged if they do put those extra hours in. Okay, last of the slides in this section. Ollie, thank you. What are the things that your organisation can do positively? Now, this is an analysis of free text responses, and the quotes I've put up are all from organisations in north of the border. Again, staff in different roles want different things from their organisation, but training is pretty much top for everybody. And below training, just making sure the tech does what I want it to do, that it's there, that perhaps the broadband is there. Strategy also comes in, and again, people don't have to be aware of a strategy to feel that it's supporting them, but a lot of people were talking about needing a clear strategy, particularly so they know, well, what should my aspirations be for myself, you know, in this role? What does my organisation want from me? What does it expect from me? Having some clarity around that. And also, you know, one of the things that came out really clearly from the free text around training is that people really, really value face-to-face. And I know at this time, here we are doing this workshop, not face-to-face. I'd much rather be with you doing this face-to-face. We could have a much better time. But people do value that, that sense of personal support. And for all the great resources that are there of training online, video-based, handout-based, and all the rest of it, a lot of people don't engage well with that, and they want to feel their hands are being held. So an awful lot of our recommendations are around how to help people get a little bit of mentoring or co-mentoring that just lifts them over that threshold of being able to engage with something new. Okay, I'm going to go through, Ollie, the next slide. Yeah, I'm going to go through that one because I think I've I'll cover it in the recommendations, and just go on to recommendations if you would for me, that's great, practical recommendations. So I don't want to take you up for much longer. I've got 5 things that came out of the report to leave with you and to discuss how strategically they might help your organisation. And the first one is that one I've said all the way through, which is just talking about digital skills. Doesn't have to be a formal thing. It could be really informal, but just looking over people's shoulders. How are you doing that? You know, here's a workaround. Can you show me how to do it? You know, I know someone in an organisation down the road or at the other end of the country who's on a webinar link who knows how to do that, and we can put you in touch. Involving everybody in those conversations and not assuming that there's 1 or 2 people in the organisation who own digital capability and everybody else doesn't need it. Kind of bringing people in, encouraging people to share the things that they're good at and the things especially that they really like to do, the things like video editing and, you know, developing audio tours that, you know, people really want to do, that people find creative and fun, and trying to distribute the tasks in line with what people are actually interested to do. So there's the talk recommendation. The second one, Ollie, is the next slide is connectivity. I know that's a big issue. Ollie and I, before we started, were sharing our woes at being stuck in connectivity black spots in the southwest of England, but investing in the best connectivity you can, because that is how, particularly at this time, people are going to be able to connect with other people who have skills they can share, and also the technologies and tools to make that easy to do. It's how people feel about their skills. It's like if the tools aren't there or are very out of date, it's hard to feel motivated to upgrade your skills because the sense is maybe they're not going to be recognised or used. And also my experience, and you know, others can share this within your sector space, but my experience in the heritage sector is that there's often funding for technical solutions that might not be there for some of the more cultural, strategic, training type solutions that we know are needed. But sometimes the technical solutions can be put in with some of those cultural and training changes alongside them. So it's always worth looking for technical funding, even if you don't think it's what you need, because some of the other things you really do need can maybe come in alongside it. So connectivity, talking, planning it together. This is where we come to the kind of meat of the workshop today. An action plan. Does it have to be a really formal document? No, it doesn't. You can reuse and repurpose bits and pieces from other organisations, and often that's the best thing to do because they've got policies and strategies that have worked for them. If they're similar enough to you, they'll work for you as well. There's no point spending a lot of resource, of precious resource, building a complicated strategy and plan, particularly as we've just seen those figures for how few people in the organisation are likely to really engage with it. You just need something that says, we're making the first steps. We're starting out, and these are our broad intentions. Stay flexible. You can always add policies. You can always grow complexity. Really work out how to access free online resources. No, it's fine, move on, Ollie. Know how to access free online resources, and do plan together with other organisations in this network that you're setting up here. Share bits of policy, share bits of strategy, share the things that work. I think I've tried to emphasise throughout that what works for a volunteer who has one set of motives for being involved is going to be very different to what works for a CEO, a trustee, or a digital specialist member of staff that you're employing to do a particular project. So people see their digital skills through those lenses of role and context. They don't see them in a sort of abstract way. So just as we would be doing with audience research or participation work, it's about understanding people and what their motives are. Something like the DASH survey gives you some real insights, but you don't need to do the whole thing. To just throw a couple of questions out in a meeting, stick them on a Padlet, as I've just done, to get some feedback from everybody in your organisation about where they're up to and what they think works in their role. As we've kind of said, access to resources is not enough. You need to know about those motives. And the final point, which is what we're doing here, and I'll shut up so we can do a bit more interactive sharing, is about sharing expertise across organisations, thinking about the number of really small bodies there are in heritage, thinking about the lack of resources we're all facing. You know, it's about finding people who might be willing to act as mentors and champions, perhaps across organisational boundaries. Perhaps this is something that all those young people wanting to start out in jobs in heritage, but not sure where to go. There might be roles that are just crying out for people at the start of their careers, or people taking looking at what career they want, who could offer some kind of mentorship, some of that face-to-face contact or that one-to-one contact that helps people step into some new skills. Maybe that could be a cross-organisational role. We have strongly recommended to the National Lottery Heritage Fund that they look at funding some of these cross-organisational roles, that they're obviously things that single organisations might struggle to fund for themselves. But even without that going forward yet, talk to each other, find out where there's opportunities for co-mentoring. I know that's a big part of what the Cupido project is doing, and so I thought the DASH recommendations fitted in really well with that. And the community of practice approach, again, fits in really well with the kind of approach you're already taking to sharing what you know. So I'm really happy to go back over any of that. I know it's been a kind of whirlwind tour, or just to take a few questions now and then maybe move on to the round table when we can address questions collectively in a sort of broader panel-based discussion. And I'll hand back to Anne-Marie to decide how to play that one. Anne-Marie.
Thank you very much. I'm just conscious of time, Helen, so I think what we might do is just to go with your latter suggestion there, and if we all can come together at the end for a roundtable discussion, and you'll then have the opportunity to ask Helen and the panel any questions. So is that okay with you, Helen? Yes, great. Ollie, if we could then, if we could just move on, and I'm just going to sort of close this first part of the workshop with a presentation, as I mentioned earlier, about the Cupido project, and we'll then sort of stop for a short break, and we'll then come back for a roundtable discussion that will be led by Alan. So Ollie, if you could put up my slides, that would be great. Thank you. So we thought it would just be, for today's session, we thought it would be quite useful to share some findings from a piece of research that's been supported through the Cupido project. I do just want to stress, though, this piece of research, it was mainly around identifying development opportunities and needs within the cultural sector, which I'll explain in more detail later on. But I think overall we feel that some of the findings do potentially sort of impact or can feed into organisations' digital strategies when they're looking at developing those. So for this presentation, I'm just going to give a quick sort of brief overview about the Cupido Interreg project, because I'm conscious that we always make reference to it, but we've not maybe perhaps explained in detail what it's about. And I'll then go on just to provide an overview just about the piece of research that I've made reference to and the findings coming out of it. So Cupido stands for Culture Power to Inspire Development in Rural Areas, and it's an Interreg North Sea region European funded project. So the Interreg North Sea region programme, it covers the 7 regions around the North Sea area that you see there. So it covers the United Kingdom, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, Sweden and Norway. And the key priorities of the Interreg North Sea region programme relate to thinking growth, eco-innovation, sustainable North Sea region and green transport and mobility. And the Cupido project, it relates to the priorities on thinking growth and sustainability. So next slide, please, Ollie. So the overarching aim of Cupido is to support economic and social development opportunities within the cultural sector. And that's aiming to create vibrant, sustainable rural communities that attract more people to live, work, and overall to improve the quality of life. And the project has also been designed to help people share resources, knowledge and expertise to explore new business models within the sector that help bring about some economic benefits. So the project partners, 16 partners in total from the 7 regions around the North Sea. And the partnership, it comprises a mix of cultural organisations, heritage organisations, universities. We have St Andrews University, the South Norway University and Howes University based in Belgium. And then there's also a mix of public sector organisations such as Highlands and Islands Enterprises. And I should add that all the partners are located in quite remote regions with an ageing population, and that's due to both urbanisation and changing demographics. So next slide, please, Ollie. Thank you. So through the Capito project, it allows all partners to work on a Pacific cultural development pilot project. So in Scotland, it's allowed Highlands and Islands Enterprise to partner with St Andrews University to deliver a digital heritage project. And we went down this route because back in 2017, I had done some earlier work with St Andrews in relation to digital heritage, and that was part of 2017 being the year of history, heritage and archaeology. And we delivered just some digital heritage projects, but we thought there was maybe quite a lot more that we could be doing in this area. And we thought that Capito sort of lent itself quite well to some of the work that we were looking at. And we were invited to join the project. So hence Hi and St Andrews, we joined the project because we were interested in the areas of research and also working with our partners on different projects, and in particular looking at this area of digital heritage. So our pilot project in Scotland, it comprises of 2 main areas, and that's around look at digital heritage skills workshops, and this programme of workshops that's been developed by Alan and Catherine at St Andrews. And another strand of the project is on digital adoption, and that's working with a small group of cultural organisations to support them adopt relevant technologies that will help them bring about social and economic benefits. And if we could just move on, Ollie, to the next slide, thank you. I'm just going to do a very, very quick whistle-stop tour of the organisations and the projects that we're currently working on. So I'll start in Orkney. I'll start the projects that are currently underway. And you heard from Valerie a few weeks ago from the North Isles Landscape Partnership Scheme. And through Capito, St Andrews are working with the Landscape Partnership Scheme on a project to connect Orkney's North Isles communities. So we're working with a group of, I think, 8 cultural organisations located across Orkney's North Isles. And we're looking at developing a VR project that helps to connect those island communities, as well as helping to market their unique cultural offering. And then moving on, we're currently working with the Scapa Flow. Sorry, Ollie, if you could go back to the last slide, and I'll just quickly outline the organisations that we're working with. So just in the Scapa Flow Museum, St Andrews are working with them on a digital reconstruction of Scapa Flow as a naval base during wartime. St Andrews are also currently working with the Highlanders Museum and working with them to digitise museum objects relating to World War II, and also looking to create a VR exhibit of a prisoner of war camp. St Andrews have recently completed a project with the Aros Centre in Skye, and that was around developing digital content for a new screen production titled The Skye Story, which looks at different historical periods of Skye. And St Andrews have also produced a supplementary VR exhibit. Going across to the Western Isles, St Andrews is working on a VR exhibit of St Kilda and working with the Una Hurst group on that project. And then moving up to North Uist, St Andrews are going to be looking at doing a digital project with Ty Cursivan. Are currently just scoping that project at the moment, but that will be a digital project that relates to the local music sector. And then finally, just moving up to Shetland. Again, we're just currently working with Shetland Amenity Trust and Shetland Bus Friendship Society to scope those two projects. But we're looking at the possibility of creating a digital reconstruction of the Shetland bus, which was a very special wartime operation between Shetland and Norway and involved a number of fishing boats to transport supplies and ammunitions between Shetland and Norway during wartime. So that is just to give you a flavour just of the digital projects that we're working on through the Cupido project. And Ollie, if we can now move on to the next slide, and I'll now just move on to talk about the piece of cultural research. And as part of the Cupido project, as I mentioned, whilst all partners are delivering a Pacific Cultural Development project, we also work on areas of research. And this, it's an area why particularly I was quite interested in getting involved in Cupido, was just really that opportunity to work with international partners to undertake research to help identify the sector's potential in bringing about social and economic benefits in rural communities. So if we could move on to the next slide, Ollie. And the most recent piece of research that we've completed is titled The Power of Culture, the DNA of a Region. And as I mentioned, we thought it would be helpful for today's workshop just to share some of the findings, because a lot of the findings do relate to the importance of digital development within the sector. And I think how potentially some of those findings could impact on development strategy, and particularly when an organisation is maybe looking at developing a new digital strategy for their organisation. So there was an international survey research that was led by Cupido's academic partners. So that was St Andrews University, South Norway University, and Houwelst University based in Belgium. And the survey, it involved cultural organisations, creative businesses, and public sector organisations, as well as businesses just that operate in other sectors. Across all the different North Sea regions. But obviously for today's presentation, I'm going to share the findings from the Highlands and Islands. So digital innovation, I think, featured as very much a key finding. And sorry, I should just go back slightly just to explain that the purpose of this particular piece of research was to help identify some of the development opportunities and needs within the cultural sector for each North Sea region. So for the Highlands and Islands, digital innovation featured very strongly across all I think our research sort of participants identified the importance of digital innovation. And 75% identified adoption of digital technologies within the sector as being a very important commercial driver and helping to monetize creative output, build consumer base, a crowd, creating narrative, distributing product to a wider market and getting creative product to the customer. 87% identified digital innovation as a key area for development and recognising it plays an increasingly important role in preservation and promotion of communities' cultural heritage, as well as making remote places and sites more accessible. Next slide, please, Ollie. Thank you. And interestingly, a number of our participants identified the importance of collaborations between the cultural sector and the academic sector, with 37% of participants identifying the benefits of doing more work with academia, and in particular exploring opportunities to work with academic institutions to highlight the increasing number of career opportunities within the culture and creative industry sector. And that then leads on to young people, where all research participants identified the importance of young people's contributions, particularly in the field of digital, being valued, and providing young people with more education and job opportunities within the cultural sector to enable them to stay in their communities. And interestingly, all of our research participants highlighted the role that young people can play in supporting the uptake of digital within the cultural and heritage sector, as well as digital playing a role in attracting more young people to become involved in their local cultural sector. Next slide, please. And that then led on to entrepreneurship, and with 63% of participants identified the importance of developing more opportunities for young people in entrepreneurship and how they can develop their own businesses within the creative industries and other sectors. And again, it's a way to try and retain more young people within their local communities. And then finally, just on regional attractiveness, all research participants identified that culture is valued as a very important economic driver in the region's rural communities. And the survey sort of findings also recognised that some other businesses in other sectors, such as food and drink and leisure, wouldn't be successful or even exist if it wasn't for the culture sector. And understandably, all research participants viewed the region's incredible landscape, its history and archaeology as incredibly important economic assets that attract visitors and also draw creative companies to the region, as it's regarded as an inspiring place for creatives. And just finally, I thought I would just share this final finding. Out of all the places in the world, 42% identified Orkney as a place of inspiration when it comes to cultural heritage attractiveness. So next slide, please. So what will we do with these research findings? So through the Cupido project, HAI and St Andrews, we will use the findings to help support new cultural development or initiatives, or help shape some of the work that we're doing through the Cupido project. And I think we will also look at just sort of further sort of analysis on how these findings can also sort of potentially feed into developing or impact on digital strategy. And additionally, we will also use the findings to help inform work in helping developing the region's culture sector. So next slide, Ollie. And I think that just brings me to an end of my presentation. And again, I think what we'll do when we join the roundtable discussion after our break, I'm happy just to take any questions then. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And I'm just conscious of time. It's 2:30, and I'm sure everyone is probably in need of a bit of a comfort break. So if we could maybe come back, we could maybe have a 10-minute break, and if we could maybe come back at 2:40, and we'll then be joined by Dr. Alan Miller, Catherine Ann Cassidy, and Dr. Bess Rhodes, Dr. Ian Oliver, and Helen and myself for the roundtable discussion.
starting to get back together, people. I think we've still got a couple of minutes before the end of the break. Thank you for your presentation just now. It's really, the two presentations, lovely start to it all.
That's okay. Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Alan, could I possibly pass over to you to start the roundtable discussion? I think we might just still be waiting on Catherine to rejoin.
Yeah, sure.
That's great. Thank you.
You can hear me. And we're on Facebook too, which is good. There were yeah, Ian was broadcasting it onto. Anyway, hello everybody. Welcome back to the second half to roundtable discussion. And I think, Catherine, there were some questions that we'd kind of thought of before, but actually, I was just wondering, Helen, if we could bring up the Padlet that you had prepared, because there's some questions in there, and I think it would be appropriate to start off kind of just to see whether whether there's discussion from the Padlet or just from your and Anne-Marie's introductions, which were fascinating. Do we need to share a screen? We are sharing a screen.
Oh, there you go. I was going to say I can pull it up too.
I haven't come across the Padlet technology before, but it's very nice. So, pre-government question, what do you know about digital skills in your organisation?
I'm sorry, there isn't a chat window for me to put the URL into. That's the thing that's missing. But I know Ollie did send it out to people in advance. So if you have that email, you should just be able to log in and add your thoughts there if you want to. We can all see them. Or alternatively, just speak.
All right. Okay.
So this idea about you're asking, what do you know about digital skills in your organisation? And I suppose that's a really important question, isn't it? Because when people think about digital, a lot of the time people are thinking about, oh well, you know, how many computers, cameras, laptops have we got, and you know, are we connected to the internet, and that those sort of technical questions, but none of that works without people, does it? And I suppose, was that a question, you know, in the DASH project that came up a lot? I mean, you've kind of put that as your first question. Is the reason why you chose that to do with the DASH project, or with your experience in it?
Well, I guess the DASH project was came about because the National Heritage Fund and various projects they funded over the years in digital skills, they had so some of you may know the Digital Compass that was developed by a group of projects, kind of quite large culture, heritage and culture projects, which is very comprehensive process that you go through in, I think, 10 or 12 different sections. People can maybe fill me in about that, which is very detailed audit of whole sorts of digital issues in your organisation, of which skills is one. And I think they were, it's a great piece of work to do if you're a large organisation that has the kind of resources to do it, and that has things like official digital strategies and HR departments and, you know, so on. But we were trying to do something much more lightweight, and we were trying to kind of say, well, if you really just have a few people and you want to have a good conversation about your digital skills, what are the key questions you need to ask? So our survey design was meant to be a very lightweight kind of approach to that. And I guess that slide I put up that I can put back up, which was really about when have you discussed your digital skills, which is a question we always find really useful to ask, in the sense that was kind of answering this question a little bit. Like, is it at appraisal? Is it when you recruit and onboard people? Is it at formal meetings? Is it when, for a lot of organisations, it was literally when lockdown started and they had to begin to think about whether they were going to use Zoom and how they were going to use it. So it was kind of trying to create those more informal questions and opportunities to ask them. That's why we as a team got involved, because that's what our expertise is.
Yeah, it's fascinating, but I think it's also the case that for heritage type organisations, it's not just the people who are in the organisation; it's also the people who are maybe the audience, and also I think that there's this sort of crossover space of people who are interested, maybe volunteers, may have been professional at one point and not now, or the other way around, of people who like contribute but aren't necessarily core personnel in the organisation. And I guess that makes it quite easy to miss pools of digital skills or digital resources that organizations have access to, but they aren't tapping into. I mean, I guess that's part of the point about doing a sort of digital audit is to see what resources there are and how they can be most effectively used, and therefore I suppose identifying areas that are sort of underused. And I don't know. I would have thought that for a lot of places, there's a lot of digital resources and digital skills in community that maybe don't get all this. Maybe organisational structures find it difficult to tap into or release or utilise those.
Yeah, I think that, Alan, that's something that maybe came out in the Capito research, just from some of the responses that identified, I think I mentioned in the presentation, just like young people are incredibly skilled in the use of digital, and probably because they've grown up using digital, and it's looking at maybe how you can transfer that skill set into the cultural sector, or looking at ways to support maybe young people to becoming more involved in the cultural sector, so they can share their digital skill set. And I think, just going back to the Capito research, I think that was sort of identified particularly within the cultural heritage sector, where it was identified that just within some heritage organisation, by no means not all, but the staff sort of complement can quite often mainly be made up of volunteers, and quite often it's maybe older volunteers. And there's some people, I think, sort of identified in the survey, some organisations, culture, particularly heritage organisations, maybe have less skills within digital, but there potentially could be an opportunity to bring in more young people to get involved, to share their digital knowledge. And that can even be like things like the use of social media.
Can I sort of ask a question in this sort of context? Would that be all right? Because I found both the report back, Anne-Marie from Capito, and the research from Dash Helen, like, so interesting. And I think fantastic the way people were thinking both about core staff, but also thinking about that slightly wider network of volunteers. I think in both cases, you still have a model in what we've discussed so far of looking at the institution setting the tone in some ways, which is completely understandable. But I think there's an interesting question about the fact that heritage is being discussed and shared all the time by people who are completely outside institutions. If I think of my our own area of St Andrews, there's really, really lively St Andrews photo corner. There's also an old Fife Facebook group, and people are just putting stuff up there themselves. And there's obviously an interest and an audience there. And I wonder whether perhaps digital gives us the possibility to have less of a top-down museum, like professional curated approach. But on the other hand, there is obviously still something really special about the expertise that and knowledge that is held in a lot of institutions. And I really sort of wanted to get your opinion on what your thoughts is on sort of sourcing information from crowds, getting sort of ideas from sort of how people are engaging sort of more organically, and whether there's more of a dialogue and a relationship that could be built between that sort of organic community stuff and the digital strategies that museums develop. I'd be really interested to get your insights. Sorry, that's quite a broad question, but
really welcome, because I think what we were doing is coming down to those one and two person organisations is really getting towards those places where we're talking about local history meets and even Facebook groups. So I totally agree. I just put up the slide about what skills organisations need and want, but I think for me, when you talk about digital heritage, when we came into this, what people seemed to mean by digital heritage was, how do we put heritage online and create an online thing that we're going to call digital heritage? And we kind of found two ways of kind of countering that a little bit. One was that for many people who do identify as part of the organisation, maybe as volunteers, but also as staff, the places and spaces and the real thing is a respite from the digital. So for them, culture and heritage is a place they go. Maybe they have another job, or they've had a professional career, or they've particularly chosen heritage and culture because they love the real. The real is what inspires them. And so for them, digital is meaningful only in as far as it enhances the real. So it enriches your experience of being in a place, or it enriches your understanding of series of artifacts because it's tagging them or sharing them in different ways. So we kind of wanted to break that boundary down a little bit between the real and the virtual, although this is not the right time to be doing it, but it maybe is the right time to recover through our sense of grief at the loss of the real, to recover that sense of what digital culture and heritage means to people. But the other boundary we saw breaking down exactly was the one you described so eloquently, between in and out of the organisation. And of course, digital is a great way of breaking those boundaries down. If you set up a Facebook group, who knows who is in and who is out? You know, it's its own organic it's a third space, I would say, between the organisation and its users and audiences. So an awful lot of what people were talking about, perhaps without using that term, was what I would call third space working, moving heritage, moving the practices that are heritage into a third space, which is neither in nor out of the organisation. And I think what you've just described is a lovely lens on what we were saying, and I'd really be excited to hear what other people say, you know, think about it.
See, at one point there, you were talking about breaking down the barriers between the virtual and the real, and I think there's so much in that there's so much in that sort of idea, you know, because I do think that people of my generation do have this idea that there's the world, and then there's this virtual thing, because that's what happened to us. So that's what happened to me, that there was a world, and then this kind of internet, digital, virtual thing came along and sort of added itself, you know, onto it. And so this sort of division between the sort of 1970s, 80s physical world and then this sort of virtual thing that sort of emerged. It seems like a very real and logical way of thinking about things. But I just question how relevant that model, you know, is today. That, you know, when people make friends in a virtual environment, do they really distinguish? When I'm talking about people, I'm talking about sort of young people who've kind of grown up with this virtual world. Is it not? Is that not what we're trying to do? Is break down this barrier between the two things? And is that not something that's happening, you know, anyway? And should we not be in the heritage sector? Should we really be thinking about real and virtual, or should we just be thinking about, you know, exhibits and museums and almost taking it for granted that there's going to be a role for the physical and there's going to be a role for the virtual in all of these things? And the question is, you know, it's not whether it's real or whether it's virtual, it's how do the real and the virtual kind of relate to each other?
Yes, I think just like from some of the other organisations that we've heard from in previous workshops, like from Timespan and Mari from TiKursava, it's very much, I think, seeing how virtual and digital, how it can add to the real, you know, how and it's not taking away traditional collections to be replaced by digital and having digital museums, but it's more how digital can be adding, I think, to the visitor, to the visitor experience to the museum, but also as well, I think, just helping to preserve material as well. And just an example, I think one of the projects that we looked at back in 2017, it was with the Highlanders Museum at Fort George, and they were looking at developing an online research facility. Now, part of that, it was coming from a sustainability position and looking at a way to sort of generate additional income for the museum. But another part was also just sort of preserving the material. So what if there was a fire at the museum and they could potentially lose all that, all the sort of research material that they have? And I think they sort of gave Glasgow School of Art as an example in Glasgow, that also obviously lost a lot of material in this major fire that there was there. So I think it's, I think from our sort of feedback and some of the work that we've been doing with heritage organisations, it's very much just seeing how digital can add to what they're doing, and I think particularly as well, how, as I said, how it can help preserve a lot of important sort of historical material, and as well as make places more accessible too. So there are some sort of historical sites that are very inaccessible to people, and how digital can be used to make those places more accessible. So.
I think I mean, I'd love to hear from some other people, but I think the issue of digital and accessibility is a really complicated one, because I completely agree with what Anne-Marie's saying, that I think digitisation can help to preserve and therefore share and give access to kind of threatened, marginalised forms of culture and heritage. Absolutely. I'm kind of in a Celtic fringe where I live, just as you are. And there are some amazing projects to preserve minority languages and minority cultural artifacts in those ways. I also think we have to be alert to the fact that digital access or inaccess goes along with other kinds of disadvantage or advantage. So we've discovered, that those of us who maybe already had a inclination to look for online culture, to look for culture, found more culture than we could possibly imagine. Those of us who maybe already had that digital capital and that cultural capital found great riches, but I question how much people who didn't already have those forms of access and those habits of feeling entitled to them were able to use it in that way. So I do think we need to see digital accessibility as it's not a straightforward issue of access. It's an issue of access and culture and skills, which I do think needs to be considered as.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that ties into what Alan mentioned earlier of having it all encompassing, not as a silo, not as digital and then physical, and then as moving forward post-COVID, and all these digital skills that have been brought up and people have, taken the time for themselves to develop themselves and discover new things. Then how is that kind of meshed together? And then thought of with how does that the most, the largest of audiences, how do people access this? How do people interact with this? Whether that's how, when, or on what, or in what way, or where, so then the heritage sector can reach those people that then maybe don't have all of the same accessibility as some others do.
Yeah, I do think in this context there's an awareness of a variety of audiences, which I'm sure, I mean, I know that museums do a lot of analysis of sort of different types of groups that come through things, but I think we sometimes do talk about digital as a block, and having a very clear awareness that what, shall we say, a group of academics doing research into a particular type of artifacts might want from resource is not necessarily the same as what a local person might want from resource, which isn't necessarily the same as what a visitor from overseas might want from resource, so that they're all potentially different things. And I think a lot of digital projects do show an awareness of this, but not always. And that's awareness and keeping it in mind that obviously exactly what you said about whether or not people do have the sort of, whether or not sort of poverty and things means that people don't have access to, shall we say, very potentially any digital technology at all. They do, are they accessing it via something which is going to struggle with large files or something? And I think that is something that we should be very aware of. And I think also perhaps we should flag out the fact that I'm conscious it's surprising how often you do things like trying to search through a museum collections that you're not familiar with, how hard it is, even someone with a professional background, to be actually tracking down what you want. So that, I suppose, sort of building into this whole element of sort of seeing whether or not the priorities that you have got as an institution and the things that you're interested in really map into and relate to things that someone unfamiliar with your collections or with your communities are going to understand. Sorry, that's a slightly rambling point, but
I think it's slightly, sorry, was that Alan?
I was just making a sort of an agreement noise. Yeah, it was. I was making a noise. I wasn't articulating anything interesting.
Well, I think this thing about access. So I've worked on this in a number of sectors, as I mentioned, and I think just as in heritage and culture, we have to create our audience as much as we find it. I think that's true of a digital audience as well. So we can create a digital audience to some extent. And again, I'm aware, speaking in time of COVID, this isn't perhaps as practical, but I do think that, for example, if visitors have the experience of arriving at a place and being entrusted with a piece of technology when they arrive, whether it's something really simple like an audio tool or something quite complicated like an iPad, or if it's QR codes, there's a sense in which you're developing their skills to be an audience of a certain kind, as well as researching what it is they want, you know. So I'm really keen on seeing the skills development as not just happening inside the organisation, but as creating a digital audience being something that happened, that the organisation takes on responsibility for. And I think that begins to address some issues of access as well, because, you know, you're maybe not assuming that you have this distant audience that is always accessing everything digitally, but you're assuming that you can help people to cross that boundary a bit more fluently in the offer that you make to them. So.
Yeah, I think that there's so much truth in that, but also I do think that I think it's possible to argue that, you know, the heritage sector is quite technology poor, but that, you know, more so than your general sort of people in the, you know, in the public. I mean, and that's not to belie at all. I can completely go with this idea of kind of creating an audience and the institution training up and so on. But, you know, I think a lot of museums, you know, when you think that the way mobile phone contracts work, that people get a new piece of tech that costs like £500 or £600, £700 every 2 to 3 years. Not all people, but a good swathe of the population get that, and it's an important part of their life, and they're playing around with it and they're using it a lot. And I don't think it's just true of museums. I think it is true of a lot of workplaces, and it's true of schools. They don't have like a 3-year refresh cycle on technology. You know, you're likely to be working with stuff that's 10, 15, sometimes 20 years old. And I think that's quite interesting, this sort of, you know, balance between the technical capabilities of the sort of heritage organizations and the level of technology that is in society at large. And I think that also with museums, sometimes the people who are engaged with it are at the more experienced end of the spectrum, and so maybe that kind of means that there's a danger of being cut off from the digital literacies, or not speaking the digital languages that a lot of people do speak, particularly young people. And you know, and heritage at the end of the day is about, I think, and maybe it's wrong, but it's almost definitively about passing culture from generation to generation, about passing that, you know, the other stuff is history. You know, it's got heritage. There's an active thing about passing something on from one generation to the next, and in order to do that, you need to the languages of the generation that is on the receiving end, if you like, the literacies of the people who are supposed to be receiving and engaging with the heritage, need to be, I was going to say paramount, and I think that's overstating it, but they need to be part of the equation.
Say something to slightly trouble the easy association of age with the and youth with the virtual, but I just wondered if we have the capacity to enable other people's microphones, and if there's people who haven't who want to ask any questions or make any contributions that aren't on the.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there are any questions that have come in on the comments box.
I'm just going to, there's a couple of people left in our attendees list, so I'm just going to bounce over as panelists, and then they should have the opportunity to be able to unmute their microphones and speak if they wish to.
Ollie.
Thanks, Ollie.
While we're getting that set up, could I ask a question, sort of relating? Alan was just talking about how we're getting sort of, a lot of people get new mobiles sort of every 3 years, and obviously over the last sort of couple of decades we've seen vast pace of change in the digital sector. Something obviously which perhaps is of concern, and certainly I've sometimes come across when speaking to some museums, is a worry that if you invest a large amount of money in a digital project now, that 5, 6, 7 years down the line is going to be out of date. And I don't know whether sort of anyone did work on that in their research, and what they're thinking on that particular problem / issue is.
I think there's, just from some of the work within HAI with some cultural heritage organisations, I think that question does get posed, and for some organisations it is maybe just weighing up in terms of the amount of resource that's required and whether it's going to be feasible, but also that question is maybe the benefits of investing a huge amount of resource and how valid that project is going to be in maybe 5 years' time. And I think that, you know, obviously technology is developing at such a rapid pace, and I know from some of the cultural organisations I've spoken to, sometimes there's just a bit of concern that they could invest, you know, if it is, say, for example, a new VR headset just now, but maybe this time next year that might be sort of completely out of date. But I think some of the discussion though that we have had, and perhaps with Alan as well on this, that it's some to that process of developing the digital content, and okay, technologies and things might go out of date, but there is that content there that can be hopefully transferred to other pieces of technology. And I think what we've sort of found, and I think through some of the Capito projects, it's when we're looking at a digital project, sometimes it's that process involved too, of involving and engaging the community and in developing the content. And it's quite often seems to be it's actually the content creation which takes the majority of the time and resource, and actually the purchase at the end of the hardware equipment, that's, you know, usually the cheapest part and the most sort of straightforward part, but it is certainly something that we are coming though across in terms of organisations obviously investing a lot of time, but a concern in terms of technologies be you know, just because technologies are developing so quickly, meaning that they could, you know, potentially investing in technologies that are going to be quickly out of date. But I think the technologies are developing so the actual digital content can then easily be transferred over to new hardware equipment. I don't know what your view on that is, Alan. You're and more of an expert when it comes to actual sort of hardware and the sort of technology equipment.
Well, and I think that's something that you then discuss in the project, or, you know, as you're designing the project of what will it look like in 5-10 years. And, you know, what really happens is it's not necessarily the content that changes, it's the medium that it's presented on that moves forward. So, you know, you might have it on a VR headset, but then in 5 years' time, those VR headsets might be obsolete, but the content is still transferable. And then you always have those original files, and then the processes that you used and software to create them, that might change as well. But there's interoperability of those files that then can be transferred. But it's acknowledging and planning for that as well. And then, you know, a possible of upskilling within your internal workings of people to know, okay, I can move this and it can also go onto this, you know, it can run over here as opposed to running just over here if we wanted to move it onto something else in the future.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good response, Catherine, and I think that, you know, potentially gives assurance to some organisations as well that are looking at if it is looking at digital interpretation, that if there is a concern, you know, in terms of equipment going out of date, that the importance is around the content that's being created. And yes, there will be new mediums, but that content's easily transported.
I think that's right, and I like what you and Catherine said about that. I would say another thing, which is that don't be doing a project because it's new and glossy, you know, because it won't be new and glossy forever. But when you're looking at technology, I think we should look at it with an open mind. And, you know, if you can see new technology emerging, which enables you to do something that you really want to do, or that has value in and of itself, you know, if you want to be able to see what an old building would have looked like when it was in its prime, or you want to have a conversation with somebody from the past, or whatever it happens to be, or, you know, you want to do an AR thing with the new iPhone 12, that's all great and that's cool. But in 10 years' time, when it's old, it will still have the same functionality that it had when you designed it. And so if the functionality that you had and the thing that you're wanting to do has real value, then yes, it won't always be the cutting edge thing. But if you had done it just because it was the cutting edge thing, that was a mistake. That was a mistake. The thing to do is to look at technology, see what it can do, and if it can do things that you really want to do, and that you think, and you will still value when, you know, if you like the sort of the curve has moved on and has moved beyond, then that's a good project. Then that's a good project to do.
I think I'd add to that. It's really important to distinguish between medium and interface. So increasingly, very sophisticated interfaces are in people's hands, and you can almost offer a picture because you kind of know it's going to be through their mobile phone or whatever the equivalent to that is. But if you think about the medium in which we're transmitting these cultural items, they're really only four to worry about. There's image, there's text, and if they're digitized, they're far more interoperable and accessible than if they're not. And then there's time-based, which is either video or audio, which is how we pass on events. And incredibly, we can now preserve events and time-based happenings far more than we ever could in the past. And then there's what I would call place-based, which might be immersive, so fully virtual, or it might be in place, so things like QR codes on ancient monuments, things like that. And again, as long as you know that all those four media are always going to be transmissible, they're always going to be interoperable, and they're always going to be recombinable. I mean, I can remember I worked mainly in education, and a few years ago, the idea of a virtual world, you know, a virtual world was a piece of development that took 2 years, it took massive amounts of investment, and when you created it, you better make sure that it was really reusable because it had so much actual resource invested in it, you know, like a virtual patient. Or now, I mean, I just did an online course for a week with whole range of subject areas, lots of different teachers. And one of the things we were using is GatherTown, which is it's so easy to use. It's a lightweight web-based app, and you can create a virtual world like that from bits and pieces of content you've got lying around as an educator. And you know, next year there'll be something better than GatherTown, which is more realistic. So you don't need to worry about the interfaces. If you're thinking about the interfaces, you're really asking the wrong question. But what you think about is the cultural value and how you're managing to record that cultural value and keep it in a way that can be transmitted and reacted with and responded to by people with all kinds of different interfaces.
That's great.
Can I tell a little anecdote? So we're worrying about the young people and them only wanting to do digital things. So around where I live, just a few hundred meters from a steam railway. And when I first moved here, it looked like the steam railway, which was entirely run by volunteers, was just going to die out. All the people who ran it were these old guys who were, you know, would turn up on the weekend and do some engineering and maybe get to drive the train every now and again. Well, now the young people competing to be the train driver and to do the engineering at the weekends, there are so many of them, they're having to put them on a waiting list to volunteer for this project. There's this appetite for something intensely real and great hulking steam engine among young people who spend a lot of their lives looking at a screen. So I think we have to be quite careful about creating. I know that's not what Alan was saying, but I think, you know, the relationship, there are two kinds of futures, aren't there, we could imagine. And one is in which the virtual and the real become completely interpenetrated. And the other is which the embodied real has this high and heightened value. And it may even be that the experience we've all just been through puts more energy into that second possibility, that the in-world embodied experience of holding something and touching it and encountering it with another person that you really care about face to face is going to have such immense value that actually the cultural and heritage sector will really kind of want to maximize the offer that it's making in that space. I mean, you know, both will probably happen. It won't be an either or, but it's an interesting dynamic.
So I think that, I mean, one of the things that when we were talking about like questions that we might talk about, well, one of the things was sort of, and I think it's something that has come up in a number of forums. So that COVID kind of has given people the opportunity to sort of, well, it's enforced, stoppage and change. And, it then poses the question, so what is a post-COVID society going to look like? Are we content to aim to go back to what things were like before? Or are we wanting, is it possible to develop a vision about the future? And the extent to which technology plays in that, I think it's really important to see technology as disruptive, as it's kind of like enabling change. But disruption is a really ambiguous word, right? Because it can be a positive thing, or it can be a negative thing. And I think that's true with respect to technology and heritage. And so I think that's why maybe it is a good thing to try to imagine a sort of positive post-COVID world, and to ask the question, where would we like to end up? I mean, there's no guarantee that if we develop a vision of where we would like to end up, that we would actually end up there. But there's pretty much a guarantee that if we don't, then we won't.
I mean, do you think about, like, referring back to what Helen mentioned about people really will want to have those face-to-face, tangible, tactile experiences again, if we can, because we've been deprived of it so long, and the value that it holds, which, I mean, that hasn't changed. But in the practicality of, like, developing strategy where technology is woven in to that strategy, is it a benefit to have both, as both a preparatory of touching and touch?
I think it's almost built in. I think that, I mean, a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the London what was it, charter about the visual representation of archaeology, and kind of like one of the things that's right there in the middle is that, one, technology shouldn't be about replacing real experience, and I think that there is a primacy of the real. Standing on a cliff edge with the air, with the wind blowing through your golden locks, is not going to be matched by standing in a virtual version of that, looking over, and so on. So yes, I think there is a primacy of the real, but I think where the virtual really comes into its play is where, for some reason, that real experience is not accessible, or is difficult to access, or where the digital is enhancing a real experience. But I think we would be fools if we thought that we could or should replace. And it's a worry that a lot of people have. If we put this thing online, then are people going to come to our museum? And I think it's always that there is something really special about being in the real world. We're not anywhere near surface detail.
Surely the digital could add meaning to what is there. I'm thinking of, for example, I was in the last trip I did before lockdown, the first lockdown, I visited a lovely monastic site, and they had a medieval sculpture, which did not actually even have a label next to it providing context. I spent quite some little time with my friend who had background in art history, and myself with background in history, tracking down, trying to speak to people, trying to get context on the history of this rather interesting statue. went round in circles. The people at the front desk weren't too sure about it, and they said they thought it might be a loan, but they weren't certain. And had there been a system where I could, whether it was augmented reality, whether it was just they had access to their catalogue right there at the front desk, whether I could have had an app, like there's a huge number of different ways that I could have got vastly more meaning out of that object had it been linked in to the wider historical context. And of course, we could have done that with a simple notice in the past, but we could also do that in the digital world, and that could provide so much more meaning to what, in that case, was quite a lovely object, but perhaps sometimes just seems like lumps of stone, but actually have a really interesting story behind. And that's obviously what people have been trying to do for years with things like interpretation boards and things. But there's a limit to how much you want to plaster the country with interpretation boards. And so, I mean, and this is what I would like to see very much, is to see the objects as a gateway into a world of meaning and research, and whether that's you have the opportunity to go and find out more about this specific object, but maybe that could start you on looking at wider fragments which have survived from medieval Scottish sculpture, and you could sort of go through, shall we say, all of the holdings that Historic Environment Scotland have, and then that could be linked up with things from the National Museum of Scotland, which would also be linked up with things from sort of smaller collections. And I would absolutely love to see this as you see one object and you can go, okay, what's the story of this object? But that's a starting point for this huge pathway that you could go down. And that's sort of what I'd love to see. And maybe people could trace things the other way. They could find something virtually and go, okay, this is amazing. I want to go and see the object in person. Does that make sense? But I do think the virtual can add huge meaning and understanding to the physical object.
Mm-hmm. Exactly what I meant by comparing the fully virtualized with the enriched real, and you know, maybe the two do blend into each other as we become better and better at the two. I mean, again, just, you know, I work on a community orchard project where we have a lot of traditional species, and we have, with the young people who come along, they've set up a database of everything we know about each tree, its history, when it was planted, you know, the cider we made from it. And then we've overlaid a Google Earth. We've got a Google Earth overlay for the actual orchard, and we've got QR codes on the trees. So, you know, a great thing, it gets the young people in the open air, even if they're in the open air with their mobile phone going beep, beep, beep. And I think exactly it's that enriched virtual. And, you know, and I've done great projects at agricultural colleges, to put it at the end of my professional life, where we've used the campus as the basis for creating a virtual learning environment, but the real campus is the gateway into that virtual learning environment. So I think culture and heritage absolutely has that capacity to merge those two opportunities of digital. But I mean, getting back to the issue of skills, you know, often the skills to do that are really you know, they're piecemeal. Somebody will have one of those bits and somebody will have the other, and it's having that vision for what's possible will begin to bring those piecemeal skills together. And it may not come together around a strategy, it might actually come together around a project or a vision. Let's do this thing this year. And, you know, we don't need a strategy for developing everyone's digital skills. We just need everyone to sign up to this one thing we're going to do, and the thing will emerge around it.
I think we are on 3:32. So we've been here for 2 hours. It's been a great discussion so far. So I would suggest we'd have like a final, you know, opportunity if anybody wants to say anything. Everyone can have a go each, and then call it a day.
I was just gonna.
Final questions from anybody. Everybody's been brought over as a panelist, and they have the option to unmute their microphones if they would like to ask anybody any questions at this point.
I was going to mention that because I had some questions, but we pretty much touched on all of them. And I think the only one, but I think we've hammered it home, is that, you know, can we get over the argument that technology is good or bad? It's just kind of like a train you need to get on, because then if you don't get on it, it's in some form or fashion, you know, it's leaving the station a bit. So, and it's not scary, it's nice.
So, I suppose if Anne-Marie or Helen have some closing comments, or we...
No, I think yes. I think, and just to thank Helen for joining today's panel, and also Helen, thank you just for your excellent presentation just about the DASH findings. And I should have added earlier actually that I think that the findings from the DASH survey have sort of influenced the design of this programme of workshops. So thank you very much for inputting today.
Oh, well, that's okay. As I said, it was, in a way, I was only playing second fiddle on that project. So in a sense, my presentation had to be confined to those findings. But as you probably gather, I have lots of thoughts about the digital, and it was really exciting to be able to discuss them in a different space to the one I'm used to. So I really appreciate that. And it was it's great to have still so many participants have stuck with us to the bitter end. That's nice to see.
Yeah. And I think I'll maybe just end by also just thanking everyone that's joined today's workshop session.
And next week is all about routes to finance, so that should be that should be exciting as well.
Yeah, I think next week we'll be joined by Tim Wright, who is he's a creative industries specialist with Expo North, and Tim has a lot of experience, I think, on that subject of looking at different routes to finance within the creative industries sector, including cultural heritage. And I think Tim is going to be specifically focusing on crowdsourcing. So we'll hear from Tim, and we'll also have Gillian Simison from Museums Galleries Scotland providing an overview of their different funding programmes. So yes, I hope everyone can join us next week.
Okay.
I'd just like to say a quick thanks on behalf of Expo North. Thanks for everybody. Thanks for all the contributions, and look forward to seeing everybody again next week. And I'll see some of you back over in the briefing room in a second.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Bye everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks everyone.